Hey, deserving listeners, Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial. Let's watch. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. As I always say, everything that I say in reaction to this is mostly speculative based on the information provided to us. So keep that in mind. I usually word things as such. Sometimes people think I'm diagnosing from afar, and I'm very careful not to. If I ever make a mistake, feel free to point it out to me, because that is against my principles and what I believe to be my ethical codes, contrary to what is being presented here.
So someone could have every single risk factor for IPV and never commit IPV, right?
It would be, again, if you're going to say a medical degree of probability, the answer is they will. But if you're saying uniformly, the answer is no.
Right.
I didn't show all the footage, but the lawyers going after him regarding correlation, causation, there was a bit of a weird conversation around that, but now they're talking about risk factors versus actual reality, which doesn't map on directly to correlation and causation. But the lawyer's trying to point out, look, you pointed at risk factors that Johnny Depp may have committed IPV, but that doesn't mean he did commit IPV. The expert witness is trying to dodge that a little bit. So on one hand, he's saying, yes, it's not an automatic indication. Then he said like 0.5% chance. And I'm like, no, I mean, that's not the way I would characterize. The risk factors in IPV that he identified was drug abuse. And he also said narcissism, right? Which of course, that whole dubiousness. What other risk factor did he say? Childhood abuse, did he mention that? So the lawyer is smart to go after that and say, like, it's a risk factor, but it doesn't mean he actually was abusive to Amber Heard. And let's hear his response, because on one hand, I think he says that's true, but from a medical probability, it is. So let's rewind that.
It would be, again, if you're going to say a medical degree of probability, the answer is they will. But if you're saying uniformly, the answer is no.
Right. That's what I thought he said. He answers it a little squirrely, but I think he's saying, medically speaking, yes, if you have the risk factors, you have done it, which is ridiculous, of course, especially when you even if you had 15 risk factors, that, doesn't mean that someone's abusive. And then he says, uniformly, meaning like every single human who abuses drugs is abusive to their partner? No. Now, is there a high prevalence of violence in relationships where people are abusing drugs and alcohol to the level that Johnny Depp was using? Yeah, there is a high prevalence. I don't remember the exact statistic, but given what we heard from Johnny Depp, I would never think, oh, they must be automatically violent. And that's only just violence. We don't even know about abuse, right? There's violence, and then there's an abusive cycle of control and coercion. Yeah, he's not saying something that is supported by science. He says medically, if you have that risk factor, then yes, you can say that someone is abusive to their partner because you have identified risk factors. Like, no.
IPV can occur without substance abuse?
Oh, sure.
Someone can abuse substances without ever perpetrating IPV?
Again, absolutely. But, again, you are saying different than what I said. I did not say abusing substance. I said substance use disorder. Those are two different things, because there are surely people who use substances that do not engage.
So by implication, everyone with substance use disorder is abusive to their partner? Like, no. This is kind of hard to research, because you have to, one, get self-report data from people as to whether or not they've perpetrated or been a victim. And two, you have to get self-report data as to whether or not they were intoxicated and how much they were intoxicated. So we can rely on police reports maybe, but those are just the ones that happen to involve the police. And of course, the police don't necessarily do a field sobriety test. And even if you did, you wouldn't know if they were intoxicated on something other than alcohol. But anyway, for people who are, this one study, among male alcoholics in treatment, 20 to 33% reported having assaulted their wives at least once in the year prior to the survey. Their wives reported even higher rates, so we don't know what that rate was. So let's say the wives reported something like 50% or something. What does that say about Johnny Depp? It says that there's a percentage chance given statistics, but it doesn't say anything about Johnny Depp.
Any violence does not become psychotic, nothing at all. So
and that's equally true of people who have substance abuse disorder. There are certainly people who have substance abuse disorder who don't commit IPV, correct?
They are saying people who have substance use disorders, the majority of them, over 50% do. So over 50% do. So that's...
So he is pointing at maybe a consensus around over 50%. Okay. So like 53%, 55%. Okay.
The answer is yes.
As you said, not everyone who smokes gets lung cancer.
So there are significant numbers of people. You said it was over 50. So you'd say 40% of the people who have substance abuse disorder don't commit IPV?
And those are the ones that do not have IPV risk factors, though, right? So we're talking about people
wait a
who
minute.
don't.
Isn't substance abuse disorder and IPV risk factor?
Oh, yeah. These are other people that don't have other risk.
Okay, he's being squirrely, which I think expert witnesses are trained to do on cross-examination. So he's pinning him down. Very good job by the lawyer. So you're saying that 40+% of people who have a substance use disorder, they don't commit IPV. And the answer, of course, is yes, because that's precisely what he was saying. Now, was Johnny Depp violent with Amber Heard? Was he abusive with Amber Heard? It's absolutely possible. He was clearly verbally abusive, so we saw that. Would I be surprised if he was abusive at times to some degree? No, I would not be surprised. It's just that when we have professionals who are,
That is right.
But again, we're talking about people in general. You don't know anything about any particular individual as to whether anybody's going to commit IPV.
If statistics follow through, all we can say is more than 50%, 70% will. If you combine more risk factors you have, the more likely you're going to develop the illness. If you smoke cigarettes once, that might not correlate to lung cancer. If you smoke it chronically.
Okay, so in this instance, he's actually doing a good job of being squirrely to cross-examination in that he's answering it accurately without providing wrong information and research. But he is implying that because Johnny Depp has a number of risk factors, drug and alcohol abuse, but also, and polysubstance use in particular, and also his childhood abuse history. Well, he would say narcissism, of course, which is possible, but how could he possibly know that? And what he's implying, and I think it might be working on the jury, that because he's an expert and he has taken into account all of the risk factors, the chance that he was abusive is basically almost 100%. He's not saying that directly, though, but he's implying it. I think that might convince a couple jurors.
About the traits, right?
Yes.
Somebody can have these narcissistic personality traits and substance abuse disorder and never commit IPV, right?
So, along that line,
Right.
about 80 to 90% of people who commit IPV have a personality disorder. So the answer is less than about 10% obviously do not.
That doesn't answer the question. Is that even true? Yes, it is true. Precisely. This research by Hart et al. 2011, 80 to 90%. But the method here, MCMI-2 results, I've talked about that test before, indicated that 80 to 90% of men who were wife assaulters, they're saying, suffered from a personality disorder. Okay, so one, the MCMI-2 is not a strong indication of a personality disorder. It's a hypothesis, a starting point, but the MCMI has a lot of false positives, so that is one. Two, that doesn't answer the question. What he's saying is most people who are abusive have a personality disorder. Okay, but that's the complete opposite of what he's asking. What he's asking is people who have personality disorders, people who have substance use disorders, there are some of those people who don't commit IPV, which is true.
There are more close links with IPV for borderline personality disorder than narcissistic personality disorder. Correct, sir?
I'm not going to agree with that.
No?
I'm not saying there are more links. I would say to you, there are if you're asking me there are links, the answer is absolutely. If you're saying to me more, I can show studies, say yes, so studies say that has not been absolutely definitively correlated.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen that research, or I don't remember seeing it, but yeah, that would be my sense, is that one, narcissism, borderline are probably at least similar in terms of their rates of intimate partner. I mean, I don't even know why they're going down the road of narcissistic personality. It's like, don't even agree with that diagnosis. That's a ridiculous call that he is making based on extremely limited information. But yeah, I suspect that's probably true, that there are studies that show that there's this and that. And that's the nature of our business. Like, people will often ask me, what's the prevalence of cheating? People who are concerned that their partner is cheating, or they've been cheated on in the past, or they've had a number of cheating partners in the past, or they've cheated themselves, and they're worried that it's going to happen again. And they're like, have I been through something odd, or is this just normal? Because that alarms me. And people will email in and ask me, what's the prevalence rate of cheating? And again, it's all self-report. You literally have to ask people, have you cheated on someone, or have you ever been cheated on, which is even a sillier question, because if someone cheated on you and you didn't know about it, then how would you know? So and how do you define cheating, right? Because if it's intercourse, then that's cheating, or is flirting online or sending a naked photograph. Of course, a lot of people would consider that to be cheating. So it depends on the study, depends on what the definition is, depends on the population and the age group and the cohort and all this kind of stuff. And so you will find, whenever they cite research, they'll say the prevalence of cheating is anywhere between 25% and 75%, something like that, or even there might even be a greater range. The other thing is, do you include relationships that are in high school? Because there might be a higher rate of cheating at that time. Do you only include relationships of a certain length? And do you say the prevalence that someone has cheated in their life at some point, or that an individual relationship will experience cheating? There's a lot of different ways of coming at it statistically. And so it's just hard to know. The point, though, that the lawyers bring up is that, okay, fine. If you're going to say that about Johnny Depp, then are you also saying that about Amber Heard? That's an absolute valid point. And there's much more data to demonstrate that Amber Heard, suffers from borderline, and not any data that Johnny Depp suffers from narcissistic personality.
Diagnosis or findings that Mr. Depp exhibited narcissistic traits or had that disorder. Do you recall that testimony?
Yes.
All right. And the question was asked of you of whether if you have 5 of 9 narcissistic traits. Do you remember that testimony?
Yes.
Okay. Now, one of the ones you testified before was for narcissism, it requires admiration, correct?
Yes.
What, if any, record evidence was there that Mr. Depp requires admiration?
The very people that surround him need to admire him, or they're no longer in his employment or his working circle.
Okay, goody. We are actually going to get a clear explanation of the data that he used to diagnose Johnny Depp with narcissistic personality disorder traits. Need for admiration. Give us your data for that. He says, well, everyone who is employed by Johnny Depp needs to be in constant admiration of him. How did he make that decision? Did he ask the employees? Was there an account of that? Did people go on the record and say, yeah, he constantly required me to admire him all the time? I'm just going to take a guess and say that if that existed in the record, it would be presented to us. Maybe it will be one day. So, okay, I can't really speak to that because I've actually skipped ahead to him, and there's a section of Amber Heard's testimony and some other witnesses, like the sister, and that I haven't seen, but I will get to eventually. So maybe that was presented, but even then, I can't, well, if there were a lot of accounts of that, then okay. You know, for example, let's say that you had a politician who required that twice a day he is given a list of all the positive tweets about him. That would be a sign of narcissistic personality disorder. Would I diagnose based on hearing that? No. Absolutely not. Everyone has a need for admiration, particularly people in the public eye. I have a need for admiration. I am frequently basing my self-esteem on whether or not people like what I post on the internet. I will look at the statistics of how many likes I get and go like, how am I going to feel today about myself? Am I a good person? And any content provider that says otherwise is either some other human that I've never heard of before, or they're lying, or they're unaware or something, or they're not into what they're doing. You know, like when I cook something, for example, I don't have any pride in that. And so if it sucks, like I don't really care because I don't take personal pride. I imagine most content providers do take some pride, if not tremendous pride, in their products. So of course they're interested. I have a need for admiration. Now, he's not pointing at data along those lines. He's saying that Johnny Depp forced other people to admire him. Okay, so let me give you an idea. So this will be good. If they go through the criteria, I will tell you typical examples from my practice that will fit this criterion. One example that I can give, and this is somewhat common, that narcissistic personality disordered individuals often are very concerned with how they're perceived at work and in the world. And when they come home to their family, they often will have a lot of pent up tension around narcissistic supply. And since their family are either in a good relationship with them or intimidated by them, they will come home and say frequently, perhaps every day, they'll impose certain demands on their family to admire what they did at work that day. So, for example, they might come home and say, oh my God, so-and-so said this, but then I said this, which really put them in their place, right? There's a clear emotional pressure, if not a direct question of like, that was awesome, right? You know, but usually it's implied. And if you don't go, wow, you know, the way that I explain it to people is think of like a second grader or that age of children. It's not strange to have a kid draw a picture that is almost incomprehensible and they show it to you and they're like, I drew your face, it's awesome. By any measure, you're like, this picture is not awesome, but you say it looks great, and the kid's like, yay. If you gave your honest opinion about the drawing, you would probably destroy them, and we all understand that, right? Well, for narcissistic personality individuals, they retain that mechanism. They never grow out of it because they were never given enough attunement, care, stability to actually grow out of that. And they rely on that mechanism of superiority to give them some semblance of self-esteem throughout the day, which they're constantly running away from, not only low self-esteem, but just like the complete emptiness and abyss that they feel they are on the inside. And so a common example is they come home and they might talk for 2 hours at you, and you get the picture if you're with this person, oh, I just have to listen to them. Another need for admiration that's a little not obvious is they might lecture a lot. They might sit you down and just yammer at you either about things that they know about or criticizing you, and they need you to say, oh wow, you're so smart, or there has to be some kind of vibe that you believe that they're smart because they're in this constant treadmill trying to get narcissistic supply. And if they just come home and say, how was your day? And mine was fine. There's no opportunity for that constant narcissistic supply. So those are the kinds of things that I will see. Now, if I heard that from someone, I wouldn't go narcissistic personality disorder, but it would give me a line of data to pursue further. Now, and another thing that I'll get from narcissistic individuals is when they're talking to me, they kind of do that to me. And I feel it on the inside. I feel there's a feeling of fear that I will feel because I feel pressured. I feel like I'm cornered. I feel like the individual through conversation is kind of cornering me, and that doesn't feel very safe to me. And I also have this feeling of, am I supposed to be complimenting them right now? I don't understand. Are they trying to tell me something that they want me to praise them in this moment? I don't understand. Like, there's not really much to praise there. And plus, they're a grown adult. So, but then over time, oh, I get it. And actually, the corrective experience involved. Anyway, Now, again, if he had data to support that they had to admire him, that was strong, again, that would be in the direction, but it's not as clear to me as the examples I gave. But let's hear what else they say.
The second one that you discussed was sense of entitlement. Do you recall that testimony?
Yes.
All right. What record evidence is there that Mr. Depp exhibits behavior of needing a sense of entitlement?
So again, thinking that Ms. Heard was marrying him solely for his money and his influence, and that was the case, was, in my opinion, very entitled.
All right. And
now, I don't know what he's basing that on. I don't have access to all the records he has. If there's a strong indication, but even so, I don't think anyone believes that to be true. That Johnny Depp, in general, believed that, if anything, that shows he's insecure. It's not narcissistic. It would be narcissistic to think, well, of course she wants to be with me because I'm awesome, because everyone wants to be with me. That would be narcissistic. But to say the only reason why she wants to be with me is because of my fame and money, that says you're insecure. Entitled, I suppose, would be, I am rich and famous, you must be with me. I deserve you. That's entitlement. Plus, I'm pretty sure that if he said such a thing, or if someone said he said such a thing, that was in the midst of a fight or something. I don't think anyone believes, including Amber Heard, that Johnny Depp thought the only reason why she was with him is because he was rich and famous. I think everyone in that relationship and around them thought they were in a relationship because they were in love with each other, and they triggered each other's issues and they became entangled. So entitlement. Let me give you a typical clinical example of entitlement. I'm having a harder time thinking of a quintessential example, but this is an example. The narcissistic individual, she cheats, and the spouse figures it out. There's a text or something that shows up on her phone, and he sees this indication. It all comes out eventually, and she admits, yes, I have been cheating on you for a while. And the way she talks to him and other people, she might say, well, things have been really tough lately, and the pandemic and stuff, and he's really into the kids lately, and you just get the vibe that they just feel like they're entitled to cheat and lie and deceive because they want it, and they don't think about how it impacts other people. I mean, that's not a great example of entitlement, but that's the sort of thing that I will hear. And if I just heard that, I wouldn't know, and I have heard that clinically a number of times, I wouldn't know if they're in denial of the reality because they're so ashamed of themselves, or some other reasons as to why I would hear that from someone, or that they have narcissistic personality disorder and they just feel entitled. They're like, well, I'm special, or I want that, and so I will have it. There's also, impaired empathy. They've been saying lack of empathy, which is often the way that people phrase it, but people with narcissistic personality disorder do have empathy in the same way that people with borderline and histrionic do, but there's impaired empathy because their issues eclipse their opportunity for empathy, is the way that I see it anyway.
the third one you discussed was exploitative. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Okay. And what is the record evidence that Mr. Depp exhibits behaviors that are exploitative?
Again, I think the whole concept of abuse is exploitative.
Okay.
Okay. So if I saw someone that showed signs of narcissism and they were abusive, well, at the very least, I would want to know the way in which they were abusive, because just hearing that they're abusive wouldn't tell me much. So this one's harder to come up with a quintessential example, but one example that comes to mind is that when you have narcissistic personality disorder, and let's say you're at work and you're the boss because you're very interested in getting that narcissistic supply. So you're now in charge and you worked really hard to get there because you're on that constant treadmill of narcissistic supply. And then an underling, one of your subordinates, starts to get a lot of accolades, starts to get a lot of praise. And even though you're still getting a lot of praise, you're envious of that praise, and it by contrast doesn't make you feel constantly superior, and you're threatened by your subordinate getting some praise. And so you might, behind the scenes, undermine them by talking one-on-one with other employees, other subordinates or whoever, or even the people who are praising that individual, to plant seeds of doubt in the praise of that subordinate. And And when they finally stop giving praise or they agree behind closed doors that, oh, yeah, that's your subordinate is a problem. And then you feel better. That's an example.
Fourth one was lacks empathy. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And what is the record evidence that Mr. Depp exhibits lacking empathy?
To be able to commit intimate partner violence and the control you have over someone. I'm sorry?
Can I be heard?
Okay.
Okay, so what I think he was going to say is that for someone to commit intimate partner violence indicates a general lack of empathy. Yeah, absolutely possible if you saw abusive behavior in person in someone, particularly I think what Amber Heard alleges, then the question of impaired or lack of empathy would be there. But certainly a lot of people who commit violence against their partners do not have a lack of empathy, or clinically speaking. You could say in those moments they are lacking of empathy, but in terms of a general personality trait that transcends all relationships, so that personality disorder follows them everywhere. So when you have a highly combative relationship and you say both people are exhibiting a lack of empathy for their partner, but in other arenas you don't see that behavior. I mean, if anything, a lot of people just without any prompting talked about how great he is. Now, you could argue that that's a sign of his narcissistic personality disorder. He has brainwashed everyone around him and manipulated all them to admire him. And one of the ways that he does that is by being charming and appearing to be nice. Okay, yeah, maybe, but there's not any evidence of that. So common examples of lacking or impaired empathy that I will see in my practice when they're being challenged in terms of their self-worth and or their narcissistic supply is drying up a little bit. That's when their lack of empathy becomes pronounced. When I treat people who have narcissistic personality disorder and I can manage to get them to a place either in session or even in general where their attachment needs are being met and they're not being threatened in any way, then they're absolutely able to be empathetic towards other people and caring. Sometimes it can be kind of primitive because they haven't had a lot of practice. And by the way, I want to delineate, because on the internet, a lot of people misunderstand narcissism with psychopathy or antisocial. In fact, I think most people, when they're saying that person's narcissistic, what they're actually identifying is psychopathy, meaning that the person generally lacks empathy. They're not impaired in terms of their empathy. They don't have empathy, or there's significant deficit in their empathy, and that shows up in all sorts of things, including what seems to be narcissistic, or what we would label as narcissistic. It's not narcissistic personality disorder, but it is self-centeredness and superiority, exploitation of others, callousness, crimes, lying, all these, stealing from other people, that kind of stuff. Those are very, very different things. Now, they're considered to be in the same cluster of personality disorders. I really don't understand why. Certainly, narcissism, borderline histrionic are similar, but psychopathy, antisocial to me are unique given the foundation of it. So, but then there are different presentations of that. But anyway, point is that a quintessential example of lacking of empathy. Well, in the examples that I gave, it's present, right? So the person who comes home and talks in a grandiose way about what they did at work, and there's emotional pressure to praise them, that lacks empathy because they might not want to do that right now. They might even be given indications like their eyes are glazing over, but to the narcissistic individual, they don't necessarily register that the other person isn't enjoying the conversation. They might not, and narcissistic people also don't have a lot of eye contact, so they might not even look at you to see how it's affecting you. Or if they see that you're getting a little tired, it's 45 minutes in and he comes home and you're doing dishes or something, you're standing next to the sink while he's talking about how awesome he is, and you're like, you don't want to turn back to to do the dishes because you know that will upset him. And so you're just standing there with your gloves on, a sink full of dishes, and you're like, do I? And the narcissistic individual, they don't even register that. Or if they see indications of that, they'll get really upset and they won't care about what they're doing to you. Okay, so that's a lack of empathy. If you were to undermine your subordinate, you lack empathy for that subordinate. You don't care about their feelings. You're impaired about your caring of their feelings because you're so desperate to run away from emptiness and feeling normal. Because if you feel normal and not superior, what you really feel is completely inferior. You feel like you're completely worthless and no one will ever love you.
Ask you to give the record evidence of Mr. Depp's lacking empathy that you know of.
Yes. I'll make it more direct. So if you're not agreeing with what Mr. Depp has to say, you are no longer useful. Okay, therefore, you don't really care about others for others.
Yeah, this is egregious. Where's the data? Now, maybe he has sound data to base this on, because we just don't know. We don't know all the data that was given to them. If you printed it all out, it would be several, inches high of stacks of papers of medical records and depositions and all that kind of stuff. So who knows? But I can't imagine that there's data to support what he's saying right now. I mean, it's just atrocious. When Dr. Curry was asked, why did you diagnose Amber Heard, she gave viable responses. I will even say to that, if I were to do forensic psychology work, of course, I would, I guess, do that. But so I'm not even of the sort that would diagnose based on what Dr. Curry did. And of course, Dr. Curry had all the access and testing and da-da-da, which is standard forensic psychology. But what he's doing is just amazing. And like I've been saying this from the beginning or since I've been wondering what's going on here, I don't even think Dr. Hughes would say this. And my suspicion, and maybe they'll call her back on and she'll support. I doubt it though, honestly, because Dr. Hughes seems more buttoned up than he is. And I wonder if the Amber Heard team was like, well, this guy will say anything, so put him up there. So he's saying that, let's rewind this because it's a pretty incredible statement, right? So they objected, which was good, because the objection, I believe, was he's just randomly saying things without any kind of support. And so they came back and the Amber Heard lawyer says, okay, base it on the evidence of record. You're not just supposing, you actually have concrete data of some sort to base your opinion on. And so that she re-asked the question, and then he goes off again without any reference to the record. So, but let's rewind this.
So if you're not agreeing with what Mr. Depp has to say, you are no longer useful. Okay, therefore, you don't really care about others for others. You care about others for your benefit. So off and on dismissing Dr. Kipper, for Dr. Kipper setting some boundaries on substance use protocol, substance detox, is an example of lacking empathy and not really caring what other people have to say.
Wow. I think what he's referring to is that while Johnny Depp was going through recovery, I mean, and you've heard me say this before, Johnny Depp's recovery was pretty shaky anyway, even though he was going to treatment, meaning that he would abstain from some drugs but not others, that kind of thing anyway. So, I'm not saying that Johnny Depp was somehow going through recovery in this very standard way or in a way that experts would recommend that he go through. But anyway, regardless of that, and I guess as a product of that, he's working with Dr. Kipper, who is his lead medical physician regarding his substance abuse and addiction recovery. And according to Dr. Spiegel, Johnny Depp would not comply or would refute certain things that the physician was telling him to do. Well, one, that's normal to do when you are struggling with an addiction because you want to hold on tight to substance use, or at least the option to use. And I don't think he ever really went through recovery, because I never heard, maybe he did, but I'd never heard that he was going to daily meetings, that he was abstaining from all sorts of things, that he had a sponsor and that he had ongoing treatment. Or, I heard detox, I heard nurse and physician, maybe some therapy around that, but I didn't hear a strong recovery set of behaviors. So that stands to reason that the doctor and him would disagree, because the doctor was probably telling him things like, look, you got to not use you can't, okay, we're getting you off opiates, but you can't smoke marijuana, you can't drink. I mean, maybe one day, maybe one day, but given the risks here of possible death, I mean, just think about Demi Lovato, right? I did a whole series of episodes, if you know that series, it's just like, if you present the way Demi Lovato does and the way Johnny Depp does, like, you do not want to be taking substances. So they probably disagreed because he wasn't ready to do that, which often people will do. They're not ready to do that. And so I think he's referring to that. And that is an example of lacking empathy. Is that what we're on right now?
You are no longer useful. Okay, therefore, you don't really care about others for others. You care about others for your benefit. So off and on dismissing Dr. Kipper, for Dr. Kipper setting some boundaries on substance use protocol, substance detox, is an example of lacking empathy and not really caring what other people have to say.
Yeah, I mean, if he was like that in general, Johnny Depp, and you had multiple relationship types to draw from, then maybe. But the way he's phrasing it, it's very speculative based on extremely limited information. And there's several other explanations that are more likely and or just as available to us.
All right. Another one of the characteristics that you cited was envious. Do you recall that testimony?
Yes.
What is the record evidence that Mr. Depp exhibits envy?
I think jealousy is a good start for that. I think that Ms. Heard wanting to have a career, start with that, beyond what she has, and the jealousy parts of with Mr. Franco and I think others comment this week. Last week Ms. Burstyn commented about things about jealousy. So I think it's pretty apparent.
No. Typically, when we're talking about jealousy and the jealousy that he's referring to, Johnny Depp being jealous of hurt that his wife was potentially cheating on him. One, if he had rational reasons to suspect that, then that's a normal feeling. Two, it's not an indication of narcissistic personality disorder. Could someone with narcissism be jealous? Yeah, but that's not. Well, the first example he gave was along the lines of narcissism. It's pretty dubious in terms of drawing any conclusion from anything there, but the rest of them aren't, and I wonder if he doesn't have a firm grasp on the disorder. But anyway, so envy, when we're talking about narcissistic personality disorder, we're not talking about envy and jealousy like, oh, my partner is cheating on me. That's more attachment insecure behavior, particularly, again, if you have reasons to be. But okay, what we're talking about is that person has things or accolades or respect or money or a higher position. I am envious of that because when I look at them, they have more than me in my eyes, and that threatens the idea that I'm superior, so I have envy for that, and I will be thinking about and almost obsessed about and or will actively try to get that either in parallel with them or away from them. So I'll just reuse the example I gave earlier. You have a subordinate who is getting a lot of accolades, and even though you're also getting accolades, you're envious that they're getting what in your eyes seems more accolades, even though you might be getting 10 times more than them, but the fact that they're getting accolades feels as though you're not. And so you have envy for those accolades, and then you undermine them or fire them or something because you're envious of that. Or you start to put them behind you and go, look at me at work, and you take all the accolades. That's what we're referring to when we're talking about envy, not being jealous of your partner potentially cheating on you and you have some evidence that they might be cheating on you.
Okay. And the next one you listed was fragile self-esteem. Do you recall that?
Yeah.
And what is the record evidence of Mr. Depp exhibiting that?
So fragile self-esteem would be more along the line of a cluster B trait. I should put that in. It's not necessarily the criteria for narcissism, so it's a trait. And basically what that means will be that the combination of poor self-control and rapid mood states is fragile self-esteem, fragile personality, so traits. So it would go into the line of cluster B rather than per se narcissistic.
All right, now we've seen Mr.
I don't know what he just said. Now, one, they're talking about self-esteem, which, yeah, it's not usually the first thing that people talk about when they talk about narcissism, but in my experience with treating a lot of people with narcissism, that is the foundation, is not only low self-esteem, they don't even know who they are. they're running towards defining themselves constantly through superiority because they don't even know what they are or who they are or if they have any baseline worth.
Okay. And you also reviewed Dr. Curry's notes and her testing, correct?
Yes.
All right. And what, if any, evidence did you find in any of Dr. Curry's testing that Amber Heard had either borderline personality disorder or histrionic personality disorder?
She had traits. She did not meet the full, on her own evaluation, she did not have the full endorse enough criteria to meet the criteria for borderline personality disorder and or histrionic personality disorder. She definitely had traits. She did not have the disorder by going by the strict number of criteria.
Okay, so he's asked directly, you reviewed the Dr. Curry materials. Do you agree with Dr. Curry's finding? And he says, no, she had traits, but not the full-blown disorder. On one hand, that lends credibility because Dr. Hughes essentially said there was no indication or no signs of it at all. And maybe there aren't. But he didn't have to say that, right? He could have said, I didn't see any sign of borderline or histrionic. I didn't see any justification for the diagnosis. But he didn't. He volunteered a detail that he wasn't being asked about, that she had traits, but not the full-blown disorder. Well, that's interesting. And I think what that says to me as a viewer, that there's even more evidence, I suppose, that she might suffer from borderline in particular, because he says, I saw some traits.
So battered wife syndrome, which is more subsyndromal or not quite PTSD, has 70 symptoms of PTSD. And if you hear some of them, you'll see why someone might think that. They do have reliving experiences as if feeling as if the abuse is happening, even if it's not, upon reminders of abuse, such as getting ready to use something, getting ready to use a substance or something along that line. They do have hyperarousal. They do have hypervigilance, which is very easily mistaken for the emotional reactivity of borderline personality disorder. They do have avoidance symptoms, so they avoid emotions, activities, people, and if that can't be happening, they start becoming much more anxious, much more hyper.
Okay, it's a good question to ask and a good thing for them if they want to cast doubt on the diagnosis of Amber Heard of borderline. Again, I want to say that even if she does have borderline, that doesn't mean that she loses the case by any means. And I'll also remind everyone that Johnny Depp, in all likelihood, has something. I've been trying to think of what he would have if, based on what I've seen or what hypothesis I would develop. And I can't really think of any particular personality disorder. The set of personality disorders is just one set of possible personality pathology. We don't always necessarily need the DSM to, define individuals, but if I was to take a guess, I would say that he exhibits general attachment insecurity, and that's not a diagnosis. I don't even know if that's true, but well, there's got to be something I can say about schemas. We see, I think, masochism, at least that emerges at certain times, with the knife and threatening to hurt himself and drinking himself. When he's angry and rageful, he, seems to go inward and attack himself. Like there was that scene where he's smashing the cupboards and he's like, and he pours this big glass of wine. But I'm guessing there's a part of him that's just like, I'm going to do this to me. Now you could say it's also just like an addiction behavior, but who knows? So when we are being abused, what's happening is confusing to children. They're just like, so I don't understand how the world works, and I don't understand my place in it. I don't understand my value, but I'm being treated very poorly. Not only is the mom being physically abusive, but she was emotionally and verbally abusive as well. I mean, she would insult all the kids, had, hurtful nicknames. And so he's being treated that way. And you start to build this belief system that helps you to predict the future. And for people that go through that, they sometimes will have this belief system that they deserve it, that they deserve to be abused, because that must be why. Why would this be happening if I didn't deserve it? I must deserve it. That must be why. Not all abused kids will have that conclusion. They often do. And then the schema now becomes solidified or hardened in the personality. It can be dismantled with a lot of corrective experience and introspection and therapy. But that becomes becomes a solid part of the personality to some extent, and they walk around with this assumption that they deserve to be mistreated. And so this belief, this assumption about the way the world works and the way you fit in the world compels a defense, because you are constantly having this intrusive thought that you deserve to be punished, you deserve to be harmed. It's around every corner because of who you are, not because of the way other people are treating you, not because of your circumstance. You just, because of who you are, you deserve to be harmed by other people. Then, over time, you need to develop some way of coping with that intrusive thought. One way is to surrender to it, which is to invite abusive people into your life. Another way is to overcompensate by abusing other people, because you're going to be like, I'll be damned if I'm going to be the abused person. I'll be the abusive person and make sure that no one ever abuses me, because I'm going to always be dominant physically. The third way is to avoid the whole topic altogether because it's so painful. So you might avoid relationships, for example. So those are the three ways in which we can categorize different responses, different defenses, or maladaptive coping to this schema. Does he have that schema? Perhaps, and we could certainly slot in certain aspects of his life to fit in the maladaptive schema, right? And some people will have multiple ways of coping with their maladaptive schema. They might invite abusive people into their life, and they might also occasionally overpower others to make sure that they're never being abused. I mean, it certainly would explain some of what seems to be happening in some of the audio in which Johnny Depp is being yelled at, being told that he doesn't deserve to be respected. You know, when she's saying, I didn't punch you, I just hit you. You know, I think a lot of people would just walk out at that point, or they just say, what did you just say? Whereas if you have a belief that you deserve to be hit, then there's a big voice in your head that's just like, well, yeah, I mean, part of that is right. Not only do I deserve to be hit, but I also don't necessarily deserve any kind of respect about that event. So I guess but there's a part of you that's like, no, I don't want to be that way. And so you stay in contact, always trying to convince the other person, when in reality you're kind of trying to convince yourself. I would say that he possibly has another schema similar to what is being proposed for Amber, which is the basis for borderline personality disorder, which is a schema of abandonment, meaning that people with borderline typically have a schema that they are abandonable and other people will abandon them. Sometimes it's betrayal that is infused in there, or it's only betrayal, but abandonment, betrayal, being wronged unfairly by other people in a really severe way. He exhibits some signs of that. The jealousy, the way that he talks, the desperation upon meeting her, the way in which he fell in love deeply with her because she was so pursuing of him. I think that allowed him to put down his walls and allow his inner preoccupied person to come forward. You know, obviously there's almost no evidence of this, but there's some signs of that. That would be an hypothesis that I would pursue. And a desperation for finally having some sort of attachment security. That would be my guess. And some people might say, okay, well, that doesn't sound as bad as a personality disorder. It can be as bad. There's no way of saying what I just said and comparing that to someone with borderline and saying that one would exhibit more problematic behaviors, because it just doesn't work that way.
Aroused. They have disturbances in relationships, which clearly can be an issue. Intimacy problems, again, which could also resemble borderline personality disorder. So those description and traits that were there, A, did not meet the full criteria for borderline, and B, could readily easily be explained by Bader-Weiss syndrome.
Right. So what they're making a case for is that the behaviors that Dr. Curry observed and the testing revealed her battered wife syndrome, meaning her PTSD, rather than her borderline personality. Well, there's some evidence to refute that, because that would be a valid question to bring up, because if she only exhibited these behaviors with Johnny Depp, then that wouldn't necessarily indicate a personality disorder. It could, because some people can hold it together in other relationships and then it all comes out in their romantic relationship in particular. But we didn't hear that. Right in the very beginning, we heard Ms. James, her Amber Heard's former assistant, talking about how dramatic she was, how rageful she was at Ms. James, how selfish she was, how reactive she was, not only to Johnny Depp, but also to her, Ms. James.
Thank you. Now, you also indicated earlier that you reviewed the deposition of Amy Banks.
Now, having said that, could someone with PTSD from being abused, could they also exhibit a reactivity to anyone, not just Johnny Depp? Yeah, absolutely. I guess I can add that to a possibility.
Thank you. Michelle, can you now bring up 1830?
Okay, so I think what we're seeing here is vandalism to his own house or to a hotel room or something by Johnny Depp. I'm thinking that was directed at Amber Heard, and it says, "Good luck and be careful at top," or something. Good luck and be careful at top. Now, they're talking about ecstasy and cocaine. There seems to be this idea among the lawyers that if we can demonstrate that Johnny Depp was using all these various different things, then that means that this would happen. And I'm just like, what? If I heard that someone was taking cocaine and ecstasy, I wouldn't know anything about anything, because how much did they take? How much tolerance do they have to that? What was their state of mind? There's all sorts of things that would play into. I wouldn't be able to know anything about their behavior. I might take some guesses as to what they'd be doing. Like I would guess, well, they're probably not going to sleep very well, and they probably will want to hang with other people of a similar energy level. They might be a little amorous, but not necessarily. Obviously, they could be agitated, for sure. And there seems to be a similar idea being floated that Amber Heard was using a lot of drugs, and thus that says something, which it doesn't to me.
And what, if any, evidence does this...
Okay, I actually had to Google it because I can't read it. And apparently this is from earlier testimony with Amber Heard that I haven't gotten to yet, but I'm almost there. In the red, I think it says, "Call Carly Simon. She said it better, babe." Call Carly. So Carly Simon wrote a song, "She's So Vain." Is that what he's referring to? And then it also says, "She loves naked photos of herself, so modern, so hot." Okay, so it looks like it's a written form of the kind of verbal abuse that Johnny Depp would say and text. It also looks maybe drug-induced slightly. I don't know that, of course. I think sober he was capable of thinking such things. What does this say? The way I interpret this is that they had some horrible fights, verbal fights. We could speculate as to certain levels of violence between the two, but I think it's clear that they yelled at each other, insulted each other, called each other names frequently, and I would say that this is a manifestation of that. I would even speculate that they were fighting a lot. He used substances to escape more and more and more in this episode. This is pure speculation. He goes into a bathroom because that's where he would go to escape, and locks the door, and he has a bit of a meltdown and writes a bunch of things on a mirror. Are these the worst things that we've heard from him? No. Carly Simon said it better. If someone insulted me that way, I'd be like, oh, that's a good one.
Correlate with behavior indicative of IPV perpetration?
Again, this is intimidation, psychological abuse, where you're solely trying to emotionally...
Objection, Your Honor. Can we be heard?
Okay.
All right, well, that does it for that episode. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.